Hello teachers and pianists and colleagues and friends. I hope you are well. Today we're talking about how to teach play from Bela Bartók's For Children Volume 1. This is the fifth piece in this collection. You may know it under a different title, but in my collection it's called Play. It sounds like this. And on from there. I wanted to make sure I got into that middle section because this has two drastically different sections, right? And one of the first things I would talk about with my student would be finding the form that we have an A section, a B section, and a following A section. We'll come back to that in just a second. I just wanted to say that sometimes Bartók's output of pieces can be a little bit confusing because he wrote so much for students. And I do think that's because he saw in his time that there was a lack in good quality pedagogical music for students to play and to learn how to play the piano with. So For Children is his first set of pieces that he wrote for piano students, and he originally wrote it in 1909, and then he came back and revised it at the end of his life. So you may see different editions of this, and when you look at different versions of the same piece, you might find differences between them. This particular piece I don't think has much of that, but it's just good to know that there is an original version and a revised version. Many times you will see in anthologies the original version of these pieces because they were much earlier under public domain, being written in 1909, than the revised version from 1943. So today I am looking at this in the Boozy and Hawkes edition of For Children, Volume 1. It is also found in Masterwork Classics Book 4, so that's another great resource. And there have been some more scholarly recent editions of For Children. And so I actually want to point anyone to a wonderful webinar that was given by Victoria Fisher-Faw through MTNA. I will link an excerpt of this webinar in my video description where you can watch about 5 minutes of her talking about For Children. But if you are an MTNA member, then you can watch the whole replay for free, and there's a ton of great information in there. So do check that out. And again, she talks about editions as well as many, many other things, primarily articulation. In general, I feel like these easy pieces by Bartók can be classified as either a folk song setting. Remember, Bartók was a musicologist and he was, you might say, obsessed with folk music. He went around recording folk tunes in Hungary and other areas of Europe. And so you get these melodies that we know were actual tunes that Bartók then set for piano solo arrangements. So we get those folk tune types, or we get these dance types, really lots of rhythmic movement and dance type feel. This piece actually has both because the A section is that folk tune setting and the B section sounds much more like a lively dance. And Bartók does give two different tempos for those two sections. So there you have it. I think we can separate this in talking about what to work on for those two sections. So let's start with the A section. Number one, the right hand must play accurately with articulation as Bartók marked it. So Bartók wrote so many articulation markings in all of his pieces. In fact, I think it's more unusual to find a note that doesn't have an articulation marking than one that does. And that's the very first thing that I start on with my students. So I always draw their attention to the two note slurs, that we have a down up, and that's most easily achieved if you literally do down up with your wrist. The effect should be more or less. And it should have this emphasis on the first note, and the second note should be shortened. If you have a student who's very particular, or maybe a percussionist, they might say, well, if I do that, I'm going to shorten the second note. Yes, they have to shorten the second note to get the correct gesture of down, up, down, up. Okay, and then we have in, oh shoot, I don't have measure numbers on my music, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Measure 9, we have a little portato, that's staccato with tenuto marking, and then another two-note slur. longer slurs. Again, kind of one overall gesture. And then we have thirds here. So very important to use the fingering that's marked there, 4 and 2, and then 3 and 1, so that you can play that legato. The left hand does have a few slurs, so it's important that measure 9 to do that slur in the left hand. Students will have to use their 2 and 5 to play that slurred right there. The truth of the matter is that most early, intermediate, late elementary students do not pay enough attention to what is marked on the page to accurately do every single articulation mark. So it's our job as teachers to draw their attention to all of those markings to help them listen and see if they're actually playing them as they're written. Okay, then we have to make sure they're accurately reading their chords. The chords in this one are not very difficult. They're not atonal or anything like that. We have plain old C major. Instead of the 5/7 though, we have a C sus. So it's a good time to introduce your student to a suspended chord, a sus chord. And then a F major, and then one little 7th chord, that the D minor 7, which goes to 1, 6, 4, 5, 7, 1. And it's slightly different on the repeat of the A section. At the very, very end, we get half notes instead of quarter notes and pedal. And the markings that you'll see in this edition look like they've got breaks between them. It's my understanding that that's Bartók's legato pedaling marking. So it should just be a standard legato pedal. Now Bartók has 1, 2, 3 as the fingering for the C major triad there. For a student with smaller hands, that's going to be very uncomfortable, and especially if you're using the pedal, it's absolutely fine to use 1, 2, 4 or 1, 3, 5 to be able to play that chord well and comfortably. Okay, so I think that's most of the items for the A section. In the B section, we have a lot of repeated notes, and it does go faster. So we need to have a nice relaxed wrist. I was just talking about with one of my younger students. He was starting basketball last night, first practice, and so we were talking about when he was playing something with a relaxed wrist, that kind of being like how you dribble, that this is just an extension of the arm, but if we get really locked, you'll get very tight and uncomfortable very fast. So I think it's kind of like you're throwing it a little bit. And then we get Tenutos. So those should have a little emphasis and be full value, but not connected to the next thing. So. And very important that B flat be a nice loud forte, because it's such a juicy note right there, which then resolves later. So I would say Bartók has finger 1, which works really well. If your student's having any trouble with that, try finger 3. See if that helps them brace that note and get a nice big sound. Then much softer, and he has 1, 2, 1, 2. So try that fingering with your student and make sure they're reading B flat first inversion followed by A major first inversion. So what happens here is it's almost the same little melody. We have this so, 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 do, so. The first time it's, you know, just done as C major. The second time, so, 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 sorry, so, 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 so. It's truncated, and we get more interesting harmony going to D minor. So it's not an exact repeat of the music, it's more just a second phrase, but it's worth noting that many times in Bartók's arrangements of folk tunes like this, he will repeat the same melody multiple times and reharmonize it or change how the accompaniment works on the second iteration or third or fourth if there's more than 2. So it's just helpful that your students will need to spend more time practicing that more interesting harmonization. The C major one is easy. Once they get here, that's a part where they will have to do quite a bit of practice, and you'll have to work on releasing any tension that they build up with the repeated notes or by just trying to find different chords. It's very easy to get tight and tense right there. There are those tenutos, as I mentioned. That is the important articulation in this section. So make sure your student is giving those full value, but not connected to the next note. As we put those sections together, A, B, A, that it's important to know you have two different characters, two different tempos. Bartók writes dolce at the beginning of the A section and allegretto, and then he writes più mosso, which means faster, more motion, and it's forte. So I don't think it's dolce anymore in the B section. So certainly for younger students or students who are very naturally expressive and like to, say a lot of things in their lessons, you can talk a lot about what might this story be, or what might the picture be that they're seeing in their head, or does this relate to a movie they've seen or a story they've read recently or anything like that. And you could even get up around the room and move a little bit. What would your movements be for this more lyrical and slightly slower part versus what would your movements be when the tempo is faster and there's all those repeated notes? I would guess that any child or adult would be able to make two different movements for those two different characters and tempos right there. I hope that gives you a few ideas on how to teach this particular piece by Bartók. Thank you to my subscriber who suggested this piece. I hope it's helpful to you. If you have other pieces you'd like me to cover, feel free to leave a comment below, and I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.